The mockery begins. The slowest ship in the fleet, the UES Behemoth, drifted through space like a wounded whale among racing dolphins. Captain Sarah Chen stood on her bridge, watching through the main viewport as sleek alien vessels zipped past her, massive ship with insulting ease. The joint military exercises in the Nexus sector had been designed to showcase cooperation between the Galactic Defense Alliance members, but for the humans, it had become a daily parade of humiliation. The communication channels crackled with barely contained laughter from their alien allies. "Look at the human turtle," came a melodic voice from one of the Zephyrian scout ships. "Are they using solar sails to propel that monument?" More laughter followed, this time from the crystalline vessels of the Federation. Chen's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. At 42, she had commanded 3 different human vessels, but none had tested her leadership skills quite like the Behemoth. The ship was a monster of engineering, stretching nearly 2 kilometers in length and packed with systems that defied conventional military doctrine. Unfortunately, those same systems made it slower than a cargo hauler. "Captain," called Lieutenant Tom Rivera from the navigation station, his young face flushed with embarrassment. "Admiral Vextar's flagship is requesting permission to perform another demonstration around our position." Chen could hear the frustration in her officer's voice. The Zephyrian admiral had made a sport of having his vessels perform elaborate, aerobatic displays around the lumbering behemoth. "Denied," Chen replied calmly. "Tell the admiral we're focusing on our assigned patrol route." The weight of ridicule. The bridge crew of the behemoth tried to maintain professional standards, but Chen could see the toll the constant mockery was taking. Ensign Kelly Park, barely 25 and fresh from the academy, hadn't made eye contact with her captain in days. The communications officer, Lieutenant Commander James O'Sullivan, had taken to muting the open channels more frequently to spare the crew from the worst of the alien jokes. Chief Engineer Marcus Webb emerged from the lower decks, his uniform stained with coolant fluid and his expression grim. At 58, Webb was old enough to remember when human ships were respected for their durability and reliability. Now he watched younger crew members hang their heads in shame as another formation of Zephyrian interceptors performed impossible maneuvers around their ship. "Captain," Webb said quietly, approaching Chen's command chair. "The crew in engineering is asking questions. They want to know why we're not using the primary reactor for propulsion. They think we're being sabotaged by our own systems." Chen nodded thoughtfully. Only she and 4 other senior officers knew the truth about the behemoth's real capabilities. The rest of the crew, like the alien observers, saw only a slow, cumbersome vessel that seemed to represent everything wrong with human engineering philosophy. "Schedule a senior staff meeting for 1900 hours, Chen ordered. "It's time for some clarification." Alien superiority Admiral Vextar of the Zephyrian Stellar Navy stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Wind Dancer, watching the human vessel with a mixture of amusement and genuine puzzlement. The Zephyrians had evolved on a world of violent storms and thin atmosphere, developing technology that emphasized speed, agility, and precision. Their ships were works of art, flowing lines of metal and energy that moved through space like living creatures. "I don't understand the human approach," Vextar said to his tactical officer, Commander Ziltha. His voice carried the musical quality typical of his species, but there was an edge of disdain. "They build ships like they're constructing buildings. No elegance, no grace." Ziltha, her silver skin shimmering in the bridge lights, nodded agreement. "Perhaps they compensate for their physical limitations with brute force engineering. Their reflexes are much slower than ours." On the opposite side of the exercise zone, Commander Crix of the Crystalline Federation watched the proceedings with his own form of contempt. The crystalline beings were silicon-based life forms who had achieved perfection in energy manipulation and defensive technologies. Their ships were geometric marvels that could absorb and redirect almost any form of attack while maintaining impressive speed. "The humans are a puzzle," Crix transmitted to his subordinates through quantum resonance. "They claim to be warriors, yet they build vessels suited for cargo transport. Perhaps their role in the Alliance should be reconsidered." The secret meeting. The war room of the Behemoth was a modest space compared to the grand strategy chambers found on alien flagships, but it served its purpose. Captain Chen looked around the table at her most trusted officers: Chief Engineer Webb, Science Officer Dr. Elena Vasquez, Weapons Specialist Commander Lisa Park, and Intelligence Officer Lieutenant Colonel David Sterling. "I know today was difficult," Chen began, her voice carrying the weight of command. "The crew is demoralized, and frankly, I don't blame them. What they see is a ship that can't keep up with its allies." Dr. Vasquez, a brilliant physicist in her early 40s, leaned forward. "Captain, perhaps it's time to reveal the true nature of our mission. The crew deserves to understand why we're accepting this humiliation." Chen activated the room's security protocols, ensuring their conversation remained private. The holographic display at the center of the table came to life, showing detailed schematics of the Behemoth that were classified far above the security clearance of most crew members. "What the Alliance sees is a slow, heavily armored ship," Chen explained. "What they don't see is the reality anchor system that takes up 60% of our power output." "Dr. Vasquez, explain the technology." Vasquez stood and manipulated the holographic display, highlighting systems that appeared nowhere in the official ship specifications. "The reality anchor is humanity's most advanced scientific achievement," she said. "It creates a field of stabilized space-time that prevents dimensional manipulation within a 50-kilometer radius. The power requirements are enormous, which is why we can't divert energy to propulsion." Webb nodded grimly. "Every other species in the Alliance has built their military doctrine around speed and maneuverability. They've never encountered an enemy that could neutralize those advantages. But we have," Sterling added, his intelligence background evident in his serious demeanor. "The reports from the Outer Rim aren't being shared with our allies yet, but something is out there. Something that doesn't play by the conventional rules of space combat." The dinner invitation is. If summoned by their discussion of alien attitudes, a priority message arrived on Chen's personal communicator. Admiral Vextar was requesting her presence at a formal dinner aboard the Wind Dancer. The invitation was worded politely, but Chen could read between the lines. This was an opportunity for the Zephyrian admiral to satisfy his curiosity about the human commander who helmed such an unusual vessel. "Accept the invitation," Chen decided. "It's time I had a direct conversation with our most vocal critic." 2 hours later, Chen found herself aboard the Wind Dancer, marveling at the ship's organic architecture. Everything flowed together in smooth curves, as if the entire vessel had been grown rather than built. Zephyrian crew members moved with fluid grace through corridors that seemed to pulse with bioluminescent light. Admiral Vextar greeted her in his private dining chamber, a room with transparent walls that offered a stunning view of the surrounding starfield. The Zephyrian admiral was tall and elegant, his pale blue skin marked with the intricate patterns that indicated his rank and family lineage. "Captain Chen," Vextar said, his voice carrying its characteristic musical quality. "Welcome aboard. I confess I've been curious about the commander of such an interesting vessel." Chen smiled diplomatically. "Thank you for the invitation, Admiral. Your ship is remarkable." They sat at a table made from what appeared to be living crystal, and Vextar poured a pale green liquid from an elegant decanter. "This is Kellinar wine from my homeworld," he explained. "I thought you might appreciate something different from your standard rations." As they ate, Vextar's questions became more pointed. "Captain, I must ask directly what puzzles many of us in the Alliance. Why does Earth persist in building such massive, slow vessels? Surely your engineers understand that modern space combat requires speed and agility." Chen sipped her wine, choosing her words carefully. "Every species approaches challenges differently, Admiral. Humans have always believed that sometimes the best defense is simply being too tough to break. But defense without mobility is merely a target," Vextar countered. "In a real combat situation, your ship would be overwhelmed by faster opponents before you could bring your weapons to bear." "Perhaps," Chen said quietly, "or perhaps there are threats out there that speed alone cannot overcome." Before Vextar could respond, an urgent alarm sounded throughout the ship. The Admiral's communication device activated with an emergency signal, and a panicked voice reported, Admiral, we're receiving distress calls from monitoring stations along the void barrier. Multiple stations have gone silent in the past 10 minutes. Vextar's expression changed instantly from social host to military commander. What's attacking them? Unknown, sir. The last transmission mentioned ships appearing from nowhere before the signal cut out. Chen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wine. The reports Sterling had mentioned were about to become everyone's problem. The storm approaches. As emergency protocols activated aboard the Wind Dancer, Chen excused herself and returned to the behemoth. Her senior staff was already assembled on the bridge, monitoring the increasing flood of distress signals from the galaxy's edge. Captain, Dr. Vasquez reported, her face pale as she studied the incoming data. The attack pattern matches our theoretical models for dimensional incursion. Whatever's attacking those stations, it's not operating in normal space-time. Commander Park looked up from her weapons console. Ma'am, Alliance Command is ordering all ships to battle stations. Admiral Vextar is taking overall command of the response fleet. Chen nodded, settling into her command chair. Around her, the crew of the behemoth prepared for what might be their first real test. For months, they had endured mockery and ridicule, watching sleeker ships perform feats their vessel could never match. Now, something was coming that might render all that speed and agility useless. Status of the reality anchor? Chen asked. Fully operational and ready for deployment, Webb reported from engineering. All power systems are optimal. Chen looked out at the stars, knowing that somewhere in that darkness an enemy unlike anything the Alliance had faced was approaching. Soon, the galaxy would learn why humanity had chosen to build a ship that prioritized different strengths than speed and firepower. All hands, this is the captain, Chen announced over the ship's communication system. We're about to face an unknown enemy alongside our Alliance partners. I know these past months have been difficult, and I know many of you have questioned our ship's design. Trust in your training, trust in each other, and trust that the behemoth was built for exactly this kind of challenge. As she ended the announcement, Chen allowed herself a small smile. The real test was about to begin, and she suspected that very soon, no one would be laughing at the slow human warship. The true power revealed. The Void Stalkers emerge. The attack came without warning, just as the Alliance fleet finished forming their battle lines. Admiral Vextar had arranged his forces in the traditional Zephyrian formation, fast interceptors at the front, heavy cruisers in the middle, and support vessels at the rear. The behemoth, as expected, had been assigned to the rear guard position alongside the supply ships and medical frigates. Captain Chen watched her tactical display as the first contact reports came in. Captain, Lieutenant Rivera called from navigation. Sensors are detecting massive energy signatures approaching from the void barrier. Distance, 200,000 kilometers and closing. On screen, Chen ordered. The main view screen flickered to life, showing the star field ahead of the Alliance formation. For a moment, there was nothing unusual. Then reality seemed to ripple like water, and shapes began to emerge from absolutely nowhere. The enemy vessels were unlike anything in the galactic databases. They appeared to be constructed from some dark material that seemed to absorb light, rather than reflect it. More disturbing was the way they moved through space, seeming to phase in and out of existence as they approached the Alliance fleet. My God, whispered Dr. Vasquez from the science station. They're not just moving through space, they're moving through dimensional barriers. Admiral Vextar's voice crackled over the communication channels, his usual composure strained. All ships maintain formation. Prepare to engage on my command. His Wind Dancer led the charge, followed by 50 of the galaxy's fastest and most maneuverable warships. Chen felt her stomach tighten as she watched the Alliance vessels race toward an enemy they didn't understand. Commander Park, status on. All defensive systems. All shield generators operating at maximum efficiency, Park replied. Armor plating is fully charged. We're as ready as we can be. The battle begins. The first exchange of fire was devastating, but not in the way anyone expected. The Zephyrian interceptors opened up with their advanced plasma cannons, streams of deadly energy that should have vaporized any conventional target. Instead, The beams passed harmlessly through the enemy ships, as if they weren't there. Impossible. Vextar's voice carried across the communication network. Direct hits, no effect. How are they doing this? The answer came seconds later as the enemy vessels solidified just long enough to return fire. Beams of sickly purple energy lanced out from the dark ships, striking 3 Zephyrian vessels. The Alliance ships' shields flared and failed instantly, and the elegant hulls began to dissolve as if touched by acid. They're phasing between dimensions, Dr. Vasquez reported, her voice tight with concentration. They become incorporeal to avoid our attacks, then phase back into normal space just long enough to fire. Commander Crix's crystalline vessel attempted to engage the enemy with its energy absorption fields, but the defensive systems that had made the Crystalline Federation famous proved useless against an enemy that could simply cease to exist in normal space whenever it chose. The slaughter continued as the Alliance's fastest ships found themselves helpless against an enemy they couldn't touch. The Wind Dancer's shields were failing under repeated attacks, and Admiral Vextar's desperate evasive maneuvers were barely keeping his flagship intact. "Captain," Lieutenant Colonel Sterling said urgently, "Admiral Vextar is requesting immediate assistance from all available vessels." Chen looked at her tactical display. The enemy had committed 30 vessels to the attack, and they were systematically destroying the Alliance fleet. The behemoth was still several light minutes away from the battle, moving at its characteristic slow pace. "Dr. Vasquez," Chen said calmly, "can the reality anchor affect these dimensional phase shifts?" The science officer's eyes lit up with understanding. "Yes, Captain. If we can establish a stable anchor field around the battle zone, we can force them to remain in normal space-time. They'll lose their primary advantage." Chen turned to her communications officer. "Lieutenant Commander O'Sullivan, open a channel to all Alliance vessels." "Channel open, Captain. This is Captain Chen of the UES Behemoth to all Alliance ships. You need to clear the combat zone immediately. Move to minimum safe distance and maintain defensive positions. We're coming in." Vextar's voice responded, strained with desperation and confusion. "Captain Chen, your ship is too slow to reach us in time. We need immediate assistance." "Admiral," Chen replied, her voice carrying absolute confidence, "trust us. Clear the zone now." The anchor drops as the surviving Alliance vessels pulled back from the battle. The enemy fleet began to pursue them. The dark ships moved with predatory grace, phasing in and out of visibility as they prepared to finish off the wounded formation. "Engineering," Chen called. "Status on the reality anchor?" Chief Engineer Webb's voice came through the communication system with grim satisfaction. "All systems optimal, Captain. We're ready to show these dimensional ghosts what human engineering can do. Dr. Vasquez, initiate anchor deployment on my mark." Chen watched as the behemoth approached the edge of the combat zone. The enemy vessels were so focused on pursuing the retreating Alliance ships that they hadn't noticed the slow approach of the human dreadnought. "Mark," Chen said quietly. The change was invisible at first, but the effects were immediately apparent. The reality anchor system, powered by the behemoth's massive reactor core, began to create a field of stabilized space-time that expanded outward from the human ship like a sphere of absolute reality. As the field reached the enemy vessels, their careful phasing abilities simply stopped working. One moment they were flickering between dimensions, the next they were trapped in normal space-time, fully visible and vulnerable. "Impossible," came a transmission in a language the universal translators struggled to process. "The void paths are closed. How do you bend reality itself?" Chen smiled grimly. "Commander Park, all weapons free. Show them what happens when you try to fight humans in a fair fight." The behemoth awakens. What followed was not the elegant dance of energy weapons and evasive maneuvers that characterized most space battles. Instead, it was a demonstration of human military philosophy. Overwhelming firepower delivered with methodical precision. The behemoth's weapon systems had been designed around the assumption that it would face enemies at close range, unable to rely on speed for protection. Massive railgun batteries fired solid projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. Missile pods launched swarms of guided munitions that could adjust their course multiple times before impact. And most devastating of all, the ship's main cannon fired concentrated beams of pure energy that could punch through any known armor. The enemy vessels, designed to rely on dimensional shifting for protection, found themselves woefully unprepared for conventional space combat. Their dark hulls, optimized for dimensional manipulation, cracked and shattered under the behemoth's relentless assault. "Captain," reported Commander Park with barely contained excitement, "enemy vessels are attempting to withdraw. They're trying to phase out of our reality anchor field. Maintain pursuit course," Chen ordered. "Don't let them escape the anchor field." The behemoth moved forward with the same steady pace it had maintained throughout the exercises, but now that deliberate speed seemed menacing rather than pathetic. The enemy vessels, trapped in normal space-time, found that their own engines were no match for human engineering when dimensional advantages were removed from the equation. The tide turns. As the battle progressed, the surviving Alliance vessels began to understand what they were witnessing. Admiral Vextar's Winddancer, its elegant hull scarred but intact, moved back into the combat zone alongside the crystalline Federation cruisers. "Captain Chen," came Vextar's voice over the communication channel, and for the first time since Chen had known him, the Zephyrian Admiral's tone carried genuine respect. "How long can you maintain this reality field?" "As long as necessary, Admiral," Chen replied. "Our ship was designed specifically for this type of engagement." The combination of the behemoth's reality anchor and the renewed Alliance assault proved devastating to the enemy fleet. Caught in normal space-time and facing conventional weapons, the dark ships began to fall one by one. Their mysterious technology, so effective against enemies who relied on speed and conventional tactics, proved useless against human defensive doctrine. Commander Crix's crystalline vessel moved alongside the behemoth, its energy absorption fields now functioning perfectly against the enemy's phase-locked weapons. "Human vessel," came the quantum transmission. "We owe you a debt. Our defensive systems are functioning normally within your reality field." "Glad to help," Chen replied. "Focus fire on the larger vessels. Don't let them coordinate a retreat." Victory and understanding. The battle ended as abruptly as it had begun. The surviving enemy vessels, realizing they could not escape the behemoth's reality anchor field, made a desperate attempt to overload their dimensional drives. The result was a series of spectacular explosions as the ships tore themselves apart, rather than face capture. As the last enemy vessel vanished in a brilliant flash of interdimensional energy, the Alliance fleet found itself alone in the stabilized space around the behemoth. The reality anchor field continued to operate, creating a zone of absolute normal space-time that felt somehow more solid than the universe around it. "All vessels, this is Admiral Vextar," came the transmission. "Damage reports and casualty. Assessments to flagship immediately. Medical ships begin search and rescue operations." Captain Chen relaxed in her command chair for the first time in hours. Around her, the crew of the behemoth worked with quiet efficiency, monitoring systems and beginning post-battle diagnostics. The mockery and ridicule of the past months seemed like a distant memory. "Captain," Dr. Vasquez reported, "the reality anchor performed perfectly. We can maintain the field for another 6 hours if necessary, but the enemy appears to have been completely neutralized." "Excellent work, Doctor. Chief Webb, how are our systems holding up?" Webb's voice carried a note of pride. "All systems operating within normal parameters, Captain. The reactor core handled the power load beautifully. We could do this again tomorrow, if we had to." A priority message arrived from Admiral Vextar requesting permission to come aboard the behemoth. This time there was no condescension in the request, only professional respect and genuine curiosity. New alliances. An hour later, Chen found herself hosting a gathering in the behemoth's main briefing room. Admiral Vextar sat beside Commander Crix, both alien officers studying the technical readouts that Dr. Vasquez had prepared. The atmosphere was completely different from the dinner aboard the Winddancer. "Captain Chen," Vextar began, his musical voice carrying a new tone of respect. "I owe you and your crew an apology. We had no understanding of your ship's true capabilities." Commander Crix's quantum communication added, The Crystalline Federation has underestimated human engineering philosophy. Your approach to defensive warfare is highly effective. Chen nodded graciously. Different species, different solutions. The galaxy is large enough for multiple approaches to the same problems. Dr. Vasquez activated the holographic display, showing the technical specifications of the reality anchor system. The technology is based on humanity's research into dimensional physics, she explained. We discovered that while other species were learning to manipulate space-time for speed and efficiency, we could also stabilize it for defense. And the enemy we just faced? Vextar asked. The Void Stalkers, as our intelligence services have designated them, Lieutenant Colonel Sterling replied. They've been probing the outer rim for months, testing our defenses. This was their first major incursion into Alliance space. Commander Crix processed this information through quantum resonance. They will return with greater numbers and improved tactics. Yes, Chen agreed. Which is why the Alliance needs to adapt. Speed and maneuverability are still important, but we also need vessels that can counter dimensional manipulation. Admiral Vextar stood and formally saluted Captain Chen, a gesture of respect rarely seen between different species. Captain, I formally request that the Behemoth be reassigned to lead the new Dimensional Defense Initiative. Your ship and crew have proven that humanity brings unique strengths to the Alliance. Chen returned the salute. Admiral, it would be our honor. Epilogue. The new fleet 6 months later, the UES Behemoth led a new formation through the same space, where it had once been mocked and ridiculed. Alongside the human dreadnought flew vessels from every member species of the Alliance, each one equipped with human-designed reality anchor systems. The fleet moved with the same deliberate pace that had once made the Behemoth a laughingstock. Now that steady advance represented something far more significant, the unstoppable approach of vessels that could force any enemy to fight on equal terms. Captain Chen stood on her bridge, watching as the mixed fleet conducted exercises in dimensional combat. Zephyrian interceptors had learned to coordinate with human anchor ships, using their speed for reconnaissance while relying on human defensive technology for protection. Crystalline Federation cruisers had integrated their energy systems with human reality stabilizers, creating combination vessels that were both fast and capable of dimensional warfare. Captain, Lieutenant Rivera reported, long-range sensors are detecting another Voidstalker probe near the Andromeda Gate. Chen smiled. Set course to intercept. Signal the fleet to maintain defensive formation. As the Behemoth and its escorts moved toward the new threat, there was no mockery on the communication channels. Instead, there was the quiet confidence of beings who knew they were ready for whatever emerged from the spaces between dimensions. The slow human warship had become the backbone of the galaxy's defense, and no one was laughing anymore.